Thank you very much for having a survey of economic terrain of Korea and the region and the giving us lots of numbers and dates. And with this, I suppose we'll have Q&As, and I'm sure there are many questions and comments on the Mr. Schiff's presentation. Are there any questions or comments? Critiques? Yes, Dr. Hyun.
Okay, my name is Also Kyun. I launched the Institute for International Trade. First of all, I really congratulate on your very insightful presentation on the economic outlook. I really appreciate that you're focused with the numbers and dates. You covered many things, real sectors in the financial markets and like that. But I really am eager to listen to your view on the exchange rate. What is about the trend of the dollars? If you respond with numbers, this is curious, but if you have any views or some kind of a movement of the trend, because Korean exporters are very much suffer or appreciation of Korean currency. Okay. That's my first question. Second question is that according to your forecast, Korea's current account balance might be turning into deficit for the first time in 10 years since the financial crisis in 1997. Does it imply some of the concern about that Korean economies, or is there some kind of cyclical pattern? That's my two questions. Thank you.
Is this microphone on?
Yeah.
Well, as an institution, I mean, the IMF does not sort of make predictions about exchange rates. So that's one number I think I will refrain from giving. But certainly, you know, for some time there's been an expectation that part of the global rebalancing that was needed would take place through the exchange rate channel, and that the U.S. would probably need to, the dollar would need to weaken along with other things happening. In a sense, it's working on a global basis because U.S. net exports are doing much better now. But I really, I would refrain from saying how much further we think it needs to go. Anyway, we have a whole other set of economists who work on the U.S. They probably wouldn't appreciate me saying too much on that subject. But you know, I do understand that that's a concern for Korean exporters. Although, I guess I would just point out that because it's really a reflection right now of a weak dollar, that almost all currencies in the region and currencies of competitors with competitors of Korea in the global marketplace are also seeing their currencies strengthen relative to the dollar. And actually, in recent months, the won has strengthened less than many of those other currencies. In sort of effective terms, it's not clear that the won is really strengthening any longer, although over a longer period, certainly it has. On the current account deficit, I think what I would like to, the spin that I would put on it more is that both this year and next year, the current account will be very close to balance. I mean, whether our projection is just sort of a little bit on one side or another doesn't ring any particular alarm bells for us. And I think, at least in our projections, the small deficit was driven more by a projection that the services account would continue to widen, not so much on the trade side. That partly reflects also exchange rate changes, but also there's some, as you know, some underlying structural issues. For example, the education sector, which lead many people to travel abroad. It's not all exchange rate related. if I could just say one thing I forgot to mention. I mean, this talk is, if I can make a brief publicity pitch, this talk today was based on this regional economic outlook that we put out twice a year. I had actually hoped to have some here, but they were shipped from Washington and didn't arrive on time. But they're available on our website, IMF website. They can be just printed off. If you don't want to go to the trouble of finding it, if you give me your card, I'm happy to send you the link. So it includes some of the material I talked about today, and also there are chapters on some special issues.
Okay, I have two question sheets submitted here, both from reports. First was regarding the Korean economy. Since the currency crisis of 1997, Korean economy has had various structural adjustments. How do you evaluate the structural changes? Are you satisfied with the structural adjustments, reforms we have so far? That's the first question. Second question is, some argues that Korean reform and opening in financial market is not fast enough. How do you see that comment? And third question is regarding the engine of growth for the Korean economy. Many people, rightly or wrongly, think that Korea is caught in the slow growth trap. Is it really true in your opinion? And at the same time, you would like to know whether Korea is possible to attain another high growth of, let's say, 6 to 7% in near future. And for that, what needs to be done? That is the last question. And the other one is also from another reporter, is regarding the sovereign wealth funds. As Strauss-Kahn mentioned in the FT interview a few days ago, IMF should be concerned more with new players, including this sovereign wealth fund. His question is what change would be needed in the IMF in this regard, and also what Korea should do more about the sovereign wealth funds management. And then the third question is, you already mentioned these downward risks of the economic outlook for the region and Korea, but he would like to know, particularly from the financial sector point of view, what would be the most important factors to watch as downward risk? That's enough questions.
I think so. Well, they're all good questions. I'm not sure I have good answers for all of them, but they're all good questions. I mean, about the structural changes in Korea since the crisis, certainly I think they've been quite dramatic, and especially in the financial sector, you can see that the financial sector is quite healthy. Non-performing loans are not a problem, and capital adequacy is not a problem. We don't see the sorts of issues with governance to the same extent that we did then, although I'm not going to claim that those problems are completely gone. So, I mean, we think that overall, I mean, there's no doubt that the Korean economy is far more prepared for any kinds of global volatility than they were in 1997, and so is the region, and we can see that in a small way by the fact that the past year and a half, there have been several rounds of global financial volatility, and in all those rounds, the Asian economies have outperformed other regions. So I think that the confidence in the structural reforms that has taken place is quite evident. Of course, you know, all countries continue to face different challenges, and I think in Korea those are not the same ones as the ones that they faced in 1997. I think they're more along the lines of sort of long-term challenges of the kind that I mentioned at the end. So they're, you know, dealing with aging population, trying to develop further the financial sector now that the base is quite healthy, trying to open up the economy on the services side. So these sorts of things are very important for maintaining or even increasing Korea's growth rate. But I don't see Korea as particularly vulnerable to anything like the kinds of crises that we saw a decade ago. Somebody asked about the opening of the financial markets. We think that the recent passage of the Capital Markets Consolidation Act is a really important step that will allow increased competition within the financial sector, will allow a more sophisticated and developed financial sector to emerge, and so we look forward to seeing that play out. We're also aware, as are the authorities, that the passage of that law is not the end of the process, but actually is more like the beginning of the process of moving to a fully developed financial sector, and it will pose new challenges for example, for financial regulators, and they are sort of currently gearing up to address those. So we think that financial development is critical, and it's happening, but we'll have to see now that the CMCA has been passed exactly how the implementation will go beginning in 2009. About whether Korea is in a slow growth trap, I guess I would just say that, you know, there are many countries in the world that would be very happy to be trapped in growth of 5 or 6% per year. But of course, in a country where its citizens have experienced growth of upwards of 10% in their past, this may seem not good enough, and it's certainly important to always do better. And I think I mentioned earlier from our point of view, what some of the keys are. You know, trying to open up the economy in places where it's not fully open, say the services sector, trying to make the labor markets more flexible, trying to continue to improve the business environment, trying to address problems that an aging society brings. All these things are important, and if these things are done, there's no reason why potential growth in Korea can't increase. But it's very hard to say what the potential growth is. But I think what one should focus on now is sort of getting the policies right, and not so much on precisely what figure could be achieved. On the sovereign wealth funds, yes, while I was in Korea, the IMF has a new managing director, and one of his initial remarks was on sovereign wealth funds. It's already something that the fund has been focused on, at least for the past year. But I think I will leave the question as to how the IMF has to change to address that to Mr. Strauss-Kahn and the rest of the management of the fund. Probably I shouldn't be commenting on these things before I've even had a chance to meet the managing director. But we are looking at the sovereign wealth fund issue, and also other new players in the financial markets, private equity funds, for example, and that will certainly be one focus of our work going forward.
We have only about 20 days to go, 60 days, but how many days for presidential election? 40 days, yes. Yeah, December 19th, right. And I really hope that Koreans select president based on the candidate's ability or candidate's commitment to increase our economic growth potential. As you mentioned, if we do right if you put in the right policy regime and the right institutional reforms, I personally believe that there is a room for substantially increasing growth potential. And I think this should be issued, and I hope we find a candidate who can do this, and that will be the best thing to happen. In any case, I think growth potential issue is very important, and I think this usual forecasting is based on everything else constant, but once you have all these institutional factors into the picture, then the numbers can be changed, and this growth potential can be changed. It's not fixed. I think this is the key thing we have to be concerned. Okay. Yes.
My name is J.W. Lee. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I'd like to ask a very short, straight question to you. Since that Petro-China market capitalization hit $9 trillion, it's comparable to the $5 trillion Exxon. Under this kind of situation, my question is, will that Chinese black hole effect of increasing investment into China, Shanghai this year and Hong Kong each year will continue until the Summer Olympics next year, or it will be visibly slowed down before spring or September next year? That is my question.
That's a very good question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer. Otherwise, I could just leave my job and retire. No, it's just very perilous to try and predict things about the equity markets. But you talked about black hole, but I think we see flows to Asia as a region being quite strong. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that China is sucking all the capital out of the region. I don't know. I wouldn't want to venture a guess on the more specific part of that question. But if you have a view, I'd be happy to hear it afterwards.
Okay, Chairman, yeah.
When you talk about Asia or the region, oftentimes China and India are mentioned, but there is not much talk about Japan, which is the largest, second largest economy in the world. So would you make any comments on Japan in the context of the region or the global economy?
Well, I didn't talk much about Japan, partly just for the reason that the Japan story is quite different from much of what I was talking about. Obviously Japan is still one of the largest economies, and there is always the risk that if the U.S. economy were to slow, we would also see some similar slowing in the European Union and Japan. And Japan is still an very important export partner for the region. I think, if I recall correctly, the fund's projection for Japan is that it will grow around 2% next year. So I think in general we see it growing pretty close to potential. I guess a key question for Korea is when will inflation move out of a negative territory or close to zero territory, and when can Japan begin to normalize its interest rates, which would then be helpful in terms of strengthening the yen and lessening some of the competitive pressures here and in other countries in the region. But so far, inflation has remained stubbornly very close to zero, and so there hasn't really been any scope for raising interest rates. So I think maybe from a regional point of view, that's one key issue.
Okay. Yes. Okay, take the last question.
Sorry. My name is Jung Jae-yong. I'm a reporter of 중앙일보. I have two questions. One is, education is a big issue in Korea. IMF worried about Korean education competitivity. To increase competitivity, what kinds of education reform are needed in Korea? My second question, Korea worries about the economic trap between advanced economy and emerging economy, especially China and Japan. We call it a sandwich situation. How can you overcome the sandwich situation?
Well, with regard to competition from China, I mean, I think up until this point, China has been a mixed blessing, but probably on net it's been a positive, because Korea has been so successful in sort of inserting itself into the regional production process, and it's managed to increase very rapidly its exports to China, and Korean businesses have a very high success rate operating in China. But the situation is changing a little bit now, with China increasingly supplying its own intermediate inputs, either from Chinese firms or from foreign firms, including Korean firms located there. So, you know, I think that, and also increasingly moving up the scale of sophistication in its products. So, looking ahead, certainly China will be more of a competitor, in addition to being a complementary player in this regional process. And I guess Korea needs to do what other industrial countries have done, and continue to try and move up the value-added chain like they have done, and produce more technologically sophisticated products, and stay ahead of the Chinese in that regard, because it will be difficult to compete on the wage side, and also to continue to move more toward a service-oriented and kind of knowledge-oriented economy. And there, the financial sector reform is key, but also some of the services sector issues that have been mentioned widely. On education, I think I certainly don't want to claim to have any expertise on the Korean education system, other than what I hear anecdotally and what I read in the press. I mean, so I think it's probably best if I don't try and answer that in any kind of detail.
There also, I suppose, competition is important. Yes. Okay, now with this, I think we have to let Mr. Schiff go to work. This is the last day of his mission, so I suppose he's the full day ahead of him. So I really appreciate for coming to this forum and sharing your views and IMF views with us. And I hope in the near future we'll get it back to see you for those numbers and dates are correct.
Thank you very much.